Hello, welcome to Module 5, in which you'll be writing the rough draft in the genre that you have chosen, either poetry, nonfiction, fiction, or screenwriting. Your toolbox has been filling up. We have now covered theme, setting, character, and plot, as well as point of view, and voice, tone, and style as part of your voice in doing creative writing. Specifically this week, the assignments are going to, again, have you focusing on writing a rough draft, as well as a discussion that will have you reflecting a little bit on the workshop process. So let's get started. As always, we have the introduction that just reiterates the points from the module introduction paragraph at the top. And then we have the Module 5 overview, again, done in feedback fruits. It has a document for you to read and to open and read, as well as answering 2 questions. Be sure that you answer both questions and provide what is asked for so you can earn full points. Next, we have the list of required resources. And this week, it's a little bit different because there is both reading as well as reviewing. At the top, you'll see that you're assigned the reading of the following section in Chapter 2, which is reflective writing. And that reading has specifically to do with what your discussion focuses on this week, where you're reflecting about your experiences so far with the workshopping process. You had a workshop, the mini workshop in Module 3, so that's what you'll be reflecting about. And then underneath that, there is a list of several things that have been assigned previously in the required resources reading that you only need to review if you have already read them. And when it says review, what that means is to go back and skim for the main points in all of the sections that are listed in chapters 2, 3, 4, and 5. It's good to we're reviewing at this point because these things were all helpful in getting ready to write the rough draft. If you have not read them for some reason, originally when they were assigned, then now you will need to do so because, again, it's important information to have in the writing of your rough draft. So there's a reading assignment as well as a review assignment, as long as you have previously read those. Underneath the list of readings in the textbook, there are a series of links to readings that will help you with formatting and organizing your creative work, whichever of the 4 genres that you have chosen. It's a little bit scattered, and so I want to just quickly go through and kind of show you where some things are. And then there's also some notes in the Module 5 announcement pointing you in the direction of some specific things that you might need. So starting at the top, the 60-second sub-tips formatting, if we click on that, it takes us to a document that has some helpful information that you'll want to kind of skim through. And then if you keep scrolling down, there will be some things that are more specific to our needs. The first one is the Shun Classic Formatting for Short Fiction. And if you click on that link, it will give you a sample. This is what a title page should look like for a short story in proper format. And then what follows is everything that's on the page shows you the format. However, the text explains to you about the format. So it's important to both read what is written on the page as well as pay attention to how it appears on the page, because it's kind of doing dual purpose. So it starts off by telling you how to do the title page, what information should be included there, etc. I want to draw your attention to page 5, which you can click on the little links to go there. And on page 5 is information about writing dialogue, how it should appear on the page. And then there's also some examples of how it should be formatted on the page. This is extremely important because when you submit your rough draft, you will want to be sure that the dialogue is correctly indented, appearing in quotation marks, with tags, speaker tags as necessary, that it's indented each time a new speaker begins to talk, and all of that is shown here and explained in the text. So be sure and take a very close look at that, because I'm sure that the majority of your pieces, if they're fiction, will in fact have some kind of dialogue. Then if we go back to the 60 seconds document and scroll down a little bit further, we have Shun formatting for poetry. And again, there is a sample of what the title page should look like, as well as several examples of what a poem can look like on the page. Notice that, I get to use my drawing tool. Notice that the poems have titles. And I didn't point that out in the short story that we just looked at, but everything, the rough drafts this time, should have titles. It could be a working title, but you need to have a title because that helps when someone's reading it, helps them understand what the focus is going to be, have some idea of where you're headed with that particular piece of creative writing. So these do have titles. Notice that, let's see, if I want to erase, click on that, erase all. Notice also that there are different ways to have margins on the pages. That we have left, this one is left justified with everything flush against the left margin. Notice how the poem is broken up into, in this case, 3-line stanzas. This is an example of each line beginning with a capital letter and having punctuation, but that's not always the way a poem has to be. And so if we continue to scroll down, we have a second poem with a different kind of format. Again, it's left justified, but poems don't always have to be left justified. They can be centered, they can be right justified. And as we'll see in this final sample, it can be all over the page. If you can figure out how to format a poem that looks like this, I'm impressed, because I have no idea how you would actually set your margins to make it look like this. But that's a possibility. And when you have a poem that shows the form as part of the poem, that's very powerful to the reader, because they're both trying to figure out what the words are about, as well as what's the shape about, what does it add to the poem. So when choosing the format for a poem, or which margins you're going to use, how you're going to capitalize, how you're going to use punctuation, etc., those need to be conscious choices by the poet that have something to do with the communication that they're trying to accomplish. Then if you continue to scroll down, you'll find some additional information about formatting. So that's one of the resources. Then the next one, the glossary of poetic terms. I'm not really sure how we would use that for this particular module. It has a whole bunch of different kinds of poetic terms, things that you'll probably never run into unless you're an English major focusing on poetry. There are lots of technical terms, they're alphabetized. If you want to know about a particular kind of poem form, like a sonnet or whatever, you can look it up here and find out what the form is for that. There's a particular line count, particular way that it appears on the page, etc. So if you're interested in that, and poetry's your focus, then that would be a helpful tool. However, it does not show anything as far as formatting on the page. The one that I just showed you, the 60-second sub, will be more helpful for that one. The next one is what is creative nonfiction, which talks about the types of creative nonfiction, as well as giving you some information about how it should be formatted. Let's see if I can move this over. There we go. It's an article, and basically what you need to know is that, let's see, if you click on the right, let me move my box back over, there are some actual nonfiction essays that are included, and this is where you'll see the format. Generally, a nonfiction piece is formatted in the same way that you would format an essay, with indented paragraphs, double spacing, if there's dialogue, it needs to be appropriately in quotation marks, etc. This one has section breaks, which is one way of doing it. But basically, that's the format, and you're probably most familiar with this particular format because you've probably written essays before. Then there is a link to For a Few Days More, which focuses on screenwriting. And first I wanted to note here at the top, it asks see full PDF or download PDF, and actually you don't need to do either one of those. You just need to scroll down, and by scrolling down you'll see the sample script, and it will show you what you need to know as far as what parts need to be included, how they need to appear on the page, what needs to be capitalized, what where it appears, what needs to go in parentheses, etc. And so if you just scroll down, you'll see enough of the script. You don't need to download the entire script or see the entire PDF. Everything that you need is right here on the page. And then continuing on with the required resources, the bulleted ones are the ones that will be helpful in formatting for your rough draft. The ones that follow some of them have a different focus. The first one is critical response process. It's a reading about a technique for exchanging feedback in creative writing. It would be helpful to look at before you do the discussion this week. The second one is a video, 22-minute video, so it's a little bit longer than some of the videos, but it's a movie script format explained and why it matters. And so there's actually a script that they use to demonstrate how it's formatted as well as why the different parts are the way that they are. So if screenwriting is your focus, this one would be very important to watch. The next one is active passive voice, and it's a classroom poster. So if you click on the link, it will take you to a really handy dandy visual aid that explains the difference between active and passive voice. The most helpful things are always the examples. Here we have an example of a sentence in active voice. Below that we have a sample of a sentence in passive voice. Same information in both, but you want to always write in active voice rather than passive. But it's important that you know the difference between the two so that you can identify when you're writing in passive and change it, revise it so that it's active voice. But there's good information here in a very concise way, so that's a link worth reviewing. And then finally, the differences between adjectives and adverbs. And this particular site, actually I just want to draw your attention to, you may or may not already be familiar with it. It's the Purdue University Online Writing Lab, or it's sometimes called the OWL. And it's a searchable resource for everything you ever wanted to know about punctuation, grammar, citation, writing styles, etc. And so anytime you need a resource, this is the place to go. It's searchable, as I said, so you can search for whatever it is specifically you need. This particular page is the difference between adjectives and adverbs. And this is important to know as a creative writer because adjectives are our friend. They help us make things more specific, more descriptive. And generally, adverbs are not so much our friend because they are a shortcut to telling the reader how something is done, when instead you want to be choosing your verbs more carefully and making the verb do the work rather than depending on adverbs. So this is a handy page to review adjectives and adverbs. Then the additional optional support this week are two poems that are kind of humorous. They're both by Billy Collins. One is about an introduction to poetry. Again, they're humorous, so it's kind of nice to have a little light note. And then the workshop one is especially humorous about participating in a workshop, and now that you've done one, you'll be able to identify with it a little bit more. All right, then we get to the assignments themselves, and this one has actually two links that are going to be important to you. The most important one is going to be Milestone 1 Guidelines and Rubric, because that's specific to the rough draft that you're going to be submitting this week. The second one, the Final Project Guidelines and Rubric, is information about what will happen to this rough draft after you receive feedback from your classmates as well as your instructor. You're going to revise that, and in Module 7, you're going to turn in the revised version of the rough draft. It'll become the final project. So if you are curious about where you're going with this after the rough draft, then you want to click on the final project. But for our purposes this week, we need to look at the guidelines and rubric for the rough draft. And this is it. And it's important that you read the entire thing, because you're responsible for your rough draft having all the parts as well as it being in the correct format. And so there's a couple things that I want to point out about this. And I'm going to go to the announcement to kind of highlight these things. This is my Word document rather than showing it to you on the module page. And so if I scroll down, where we're at right now is 5.1. Ooh, I can draw again. Rough draft. And there are a couple things that are important to pay attention to on the guidelines and rubric. First of all, length. There are specific length requirements for the rough draft dependent on which genre that you're writing in. However, I need to make it even more specific because the guidelines and rubric leaves out some important information. So let me read this to you, and then I'll explain it a little bit further. An important note on length. When it says 3 to 5 pages in the guidelines, and that's for fiction, a page equals 250 words. So total word count must be 750 to 1250 words. That's 3 to 5 pages with 250 words per page. 250 words is the average page in a 12 font double-spaced page in Word. Regardless of the number of pages, so you have to use the word count process in Word and depend on that rather than the number of pages. When it says 5 to 7 pages, which is the length requirement for the screenplay, the total word count must be between 1,250 and 1,750 words. To count words, all you have to do is, when you're in Word, go to the top of the screen and there's a choice, word count. You click on that and it will tell you exactly the number of words in your document right here. And when you submit these, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to download your document and I'm going to run a word count on it to see if it's fitting the required parameters. And again, this is not stated in the guidelines and rubric. It just is an oversight, I guess, in the way they designed the course. But it's very important that you realize that as you're preparing to do your rough draft, because if you just do the word counts, then it's likely that you're going to be either if you just do the page counts, it's likely that you're going to be either under or over the requirement. So it's important that you pay attention to word counts and how you figure out how much word count you have. Secondly, an important note on content. The Milestone 1 guidelines state, quote, the following critical elements should be addressed. And under element E, feature a complete cohesive narrative theme or topic that moves from beginning to end rather than an excerpt from a larger piece. In other words, your rough draft should not read like a first chapter in fiction, an incomplete scene, a screenplay, an incomplete experience, nonfiction, or an incomplete thought or experience, poetry. In all genres, there needs to be a clear beginning, middle, and end, resulting in a complete story. And a classmate asked this question in the general questions discussion in the last couple of days, and there's an additional response there. But I need to draw your attention to that because somewhat frequently, students will write something thinking about, well, this is eventually going to become a longer piece, and so they'll write the first chapter because it fits into the word count. But that won't work for this particular rough draft. It needs to demonstrate that you are able to write a story, a poem, a screenplay that has a clear beginning, middle, and end. And so for a short story, it's kind of like a flash fiction piece. That kind of word count is similar to what flash fiction usually focuses on. It's a very short piece. So it might be helpful to you to read some flash fiction, and I may include some links to some flash fiction pieces in the reminders announcement this week. In a screenplay, then it will probably be a complete scene from beginning, middle, and end is what you're going to be developing. For poems, because you're going to do 3 to 5 poems, each poem needs to be complete in itself. Poems do have beginnings, middles, and ends. They describe experiences or thoughts, but they need to be complete. It's less likely that you'd be writing like the beginning of a chapter, or the first poem of a series for a book. It's easier, I think, for this assignment for students to write complete poems, but do be aware that they should have clear beginning, middles, and ends. And the same is true with nonfiction. It needs to have a complete experience that you're working with. You're telling the beginning, the middle, and the end of the experience, how it was important, how it impacted you. It doesn't lead on to something else. It's complete, standing alone, as all of these need to be. Here's the section in the guidelines and rubric where it gives specifics. And again, you can see that it only gives the page rather than the word count. And so that's why it's clarified for you in the Module 5 announcement. Okay, so that covers that. And then you want to also review the rubric. And as always, you'll be wanting to note the criteria listed in the left column. There are some specific things that your rough draft needs to demonstrate. And when I sit down with these submissions, I'll be looking at evaluating them for each of these criteria. And I'll be using the descriptions in the proficient column to see whether or not your rough draft is proficient in these ways. So that's why it's so important to review the criteria, review the descriptions in the proficient column to make sure, first of all, that you're addressing all of them. I graded the mini workshops last week, and some students lost points because they did not, review the rubric and didn't notice that you had to ask questions. And if there weren't questions asked in the mini workshop reviews that you gave, then you couldn't earn points in that category, which lowered people's grades. So be sure that you're reviewing the rubric to make sure that you're addressing all the criteria so that you'll be eligible for full points. All right, that's basically the assignment for the rough draft. I suggested last week, because you only had the one assignment and a little bit less reading, that you begin doing some pre-writing. Some people will just sit down with a blank piece of paper or a blank screen and begin to write. That works for some people. Other people will want to do some kind of pre-writing. They'll maybe look at several different ideas that they have, flesh those ideas out, see where they go, do some brainstorming, do some outlining, do some diagramming, whatever works for you to help organize your ideas. For some people that works better than just starting without any kind of an idea what your plan is going to be. But the most important thing is that you think about it, that you think about what it is you want to try to accomplish. You're going to choose the genre. We've already done some exploration of that in some previous assignments. Once you've chosen the genre, then you need to make sure that you understand the format for that genre. Do some time management in terms of how long you think it's going to take you to, first of all, get it down on the page or the screen, but then also to go back and make sure that it's in the correct format before you're submitting it for grading. This will also be posted in next week's discussion, and we will do a full writer's workshop in Module 6. but you don't have to worry about that this week. That will be next week. All right. And then the second assignment for Module 5 is this discussion regarding workshopping, critiquing creative work. And it's important, as always, that you specifically do what is asked of you in the instructions for the initial post. Notice that there are questions, and each of the bullet points has more than one question, so you need to be sure that you're answering all the questions in the initial post, and that you're not just giving yes or no answers or one or two words or one sentence, that you're actually explaining yourself. You're providing some support. When it asks you why, then you're going to give your reasoning for taking that position or having that thought. So be sure, again, that you do all of the questions. And then in the same way, be sure that you do respond in the way to your classmates that is being asked. They're not just general responses, they're focused responses. And in this case, you're going to evaluate their perspective on answering those initial post questions and either agree or disagree, and then provide some examples or additional considerations to support your viewpoint. If you've already taken the composition class here at Southern New Hampshire, you had the experience of writing an argument and having to support that argument with research and examples, supporting ideas, expanded discussion. And the same is true when you're in a discussion and you're answering a question. You need to support your answer with some kind of example, expanded discussion, illustration, so that just like a lawyer in front of a jury, you're bringing in evidence to support your particular viewpoint. So again, be sure that you're reading these and thinking about, how can I do this? How can I make my response for each of my classmates complete? And let's see, I wanted to go back to the announcement a final time. Underneath the information on assignment 5-1, the rough draft, there are some specifics locating things about formatting in both the textbook and the list of required resources that I wanted to point out to you. These just tell you specifically where to find the information in case you're overwhelmed by the amount of information and you're scrolling and you get lost, which happens to all of us. So I just wanted to briefly go through these real quick. Poetry, remember, it can take any form that the writer wants on the page. And to get further information and some examples, you want to go to the 60-second sub-tips formatting and scroll down to Shun Formatting for Poetry, and that's where those examples were. For fiction, narrative structure, beginnings, middles, and endings was covered in pages 46 and 47 in our textbook. And I wanted to show you one thing in our textbook that you might find helpful. Let's see, let me move my screen over. There's a couple of ways to find things in our textbook. We have the table of contents, and so you can go to the particular chapter that, for instance, screenwriting, you can click the down arrow and you can see information on action, dialogue, characterization, all things that might be important to you as you're doing your rough draft. And that would be true of all four genres in the table of contents. But you can also go to the index, which is at the back of the book when we have printed books, but here it's at the bottom of the table of contents. Click on index. It's alphabetized, and you have to know the term that you're wanting to look up. So for instance, if we wanted to look at dialogue, we'd scroll down to the D's and we would get to dialogue right here. And, oh, I get to draw again. Whoops. Here we go. And notice it doesn't give page numbers, it just has direct links. So all you have to do is click on the word here and it will take you. So for instance, if we wanted to go to dialogue and screenwriting, we could click on one of the heres and it will take you right to those pages and show you the format, explain to you what's going on here. So that's a quick way to refine things that are in the textbook without having to search for a long time, figure out which chapter it was in and what section, etc. Use that index, and especially when it's a digital index like this, it's really quick and efficient. Oops, that's not what I wanted. Here we go. So beginnings, middles, and endings, page 46 and 47, specifically to see what dialogue looks like in a short story. Again, you go to 60-second subtips formatting, scroll down to shun formatting for short fiction, go to page 5, and there's information as well as examples. The expectation is that you'll correctly format your dialogue for the rough draft. It should not have speakers all run together in one paragraph. It should be indented, have quotation marks, speaker tags, everything so that it's easy for the reader to see who's speaking. If your character has internal dialogue or thoughts, those should be in italics. They should not go in quotation marks. It's just italics. That's something that's used more frequently these days, internal dialogue. And then for screenwriting, chapter 5 in our textbook, again, covers everything to do with screenwriting and also has samples. And additionally, there is information and examples in the required resources for a few days more. And you can just click on that. Okay, I believe, let's double check, I believe that's everything for this week. Yes. As always, if you have questions, post them in the general questions discussion, especially this week. If you have a question about the format or any of the aspects of the assignments, it'd be really helpful to your classmates if you would post there rather than emailing me directly, because it's very likely that other people will have the same or a similar question. If it's something to do specifically with grading or a personal situation, like we had people that lost electricity due to the hurricane this week, then you would need to email me directly. One more thing before we go. I hope you can actually see him. I have pet strollers because my dog got old and and she couldn't walk as far as she used to be able to, and so I bought a pet stroller so that I could take her. Well, my dog is now passed, but my cats like to go in their strollers, and hopefully you can see that Oliver, there he is, has started sleeping in his stroller pretty frequently, and so today, there he's yawning. He's been sleeping in the pet stroller in my office, keeping me company. It's raining here today, so we can't actually go for a walk, but thought you would like to see what Oliver's doing today. All right, take care.